This family gave me everything my pathetic real family never did. My daughter Sarah announced to 300 wedding guests, her voice carrying across the crystal chandeliers and silk-draped tables. I smiled and quietly pulled out my phone, typing a single text message that would change everything in the next 60 seconds. What happened next would haunt Sarah's perfect wedding reception for the rest of her privileged life. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. I should probably explain how we got to this moment, but honestly, watching my only daughter publicly humiliate me at her own wedding reception while wearing the $15,000 dress I secretly paid for was just the final insult in a 22-year parade of them. Sarah stood there in her designer gown, champagne flute raised high, addressing the crowd like she was accepting an Academy Award. "The Williams family taught me what real love looks like," she continued, her voice dripping with emotion that I knew was completely genuine. She meant every word. They showed me what it means to have parents who actually support their children's dreams instead of crushing them. The guests murmured appreciatively. A few even glanced in my direction with those sympathetic looks people give when they think they're witnessing someone being gently corrected, rather than publicly destroyed. Mrs. Williams, Sarah's new mother-in-law, dabbed at her eyes with a lace handkerchief. Mr. Williams nodded proudly from his seat at the head table. David, my new son-in-law, stood beside Sarah with his arm around her waist, looking uncomfortable for the first time all evening. "Mom always said I was too demanding." Sarah laughed and the crowd chuckled along. "Too expensive, too complicated, too much work." But the Williams family, they invested in me. They believed in me. They made me feel worthy of love. My phone buzzed. Message delivered. I could have stood up right then and left. I could have made some excuse about feeling tired or needing air. That would have been the dignified thing to do. But after 68 years on this earth and 46 years of motherhood, I was fresh out of dignity. Instead, I stood up slowly, my chair scraping against the marble floor of the country club ballroom. The sound cut through Sarah's speech like a knife. And suddenly all eyes were on me. "Don't let me interrupt, sweetheart," I said, my voice carrying just far enough for the nearest tables to hear. "Please continue telling everyone how terrible I am." Sarah's face flushed red. "Mom, that's not what I owe, but it is exactly what you meant." I picked up my purse and my wrap. "And you know what? You're absolutely right. I was a terrible mother. I worked 2 jobs to pay for your dance lessons instead of just writing a check like the Williams family would have. I saved every penny for your college tuition instead of taking those European vacations you wanted. I bought generic groceries so you could have name brand clothes. Absolutely pathetic of me." The silence in the room was deafening. Even the string quartet had stopped playing. Sarah stared straight at me, her expression shifting from embarrassment to something colder. "You know what, Mom? This is the perfect time for you to go." That's when David, my brand new son-in-law, who had barely spoken to me all evening, stepped forward and said 5 words that made every single person in that ballroom gasp. "She paid for this entire wedding." The sound that rippled through the ballroom wasn't quite a gasp and wasn't quite a murmur. It was something closer to the collective intake of breath that happens when a magician reveals how they saw the lady in half. Except this trick wasn't entertaining anyone. Sarah's champagne flute slipped from her fingers and shattered against the marble floor, the crystal exploding into 1,000 tiny pieces that glittered under the chandeliers like her carefully constructed lies. "David, what are you talking about?" Sarah's voice was barely a whisper, but in the absolute silence of the ballroom, everyone heard it. I should probably back up and explain how we got here because the story of how my daughter came to hate me enough to publicly humiliate me at her own wedding reception is a masterclass in how good intentions can pave the road to absolute hell. 22 years ago, when Sarah was 20 and home from college for spring break, she came to me crying because her roommate's family had invited the whole dorm to their ski house in Aspen for the week. "All my friends are going, Mom," she sobbed. "But I can't afford it. I'm the only one who has to work summers while everyone else gets to travel and have fun." I was a single mother then. Her father had died in a construction accident when she was 15, leaving us with his life insurance and not much else. I was working as a bookkeeper at a small accounting firm, making just enough to cover our mortgage and Sarah's college expenses with nothing left over for ski trips to Aspen. But looking at my daughter's tear-streaked face, remembering how she'd always been the responsible one, the one who studied while her friends partied, the one who worked weekends at the campus bookstore to help with expenses, I made a decision that would haunt our relationship for the next 2 decades. I took out a second mortgage on our house, $5,000 for 1 week in Aspen. It seemed like such a small amount to give my daughter the same opportunities her wealthier classmates took for granted. She was so grateful, so happy. She promised she'd pay me back as soon as she graduated and got a real job. Of course, she never did pay me back, not because she couldn't, but because somehow over the years that loan transformed in her mind from something she owed me into something I had freely given her. And if I had freely given her $5,000 once, well, then I could certainly do it again. The ski trip led to a summer abroad. The summer abroad led to graduate school. Graduate school led to the deposit on her first apartment in the city. Each time, Sarah would come to me with tears in her eyes and a perfectly reasonable explanation for why she needed money right now and why she couldn't ask anyone else. "I can't ask Tom's parents for help," she'd say about her boyfriend's senior year. "His family already thinks I'm just after their money." Or my boss said this certification program is the only way I'll get promoted, but the deadline for registration is tomorrow and I don't have the $3,000. By the time Sarah met David Williams at a charity gala 3 years ago, I had refinanced my house twice and taken out a personal loan against my retirement savings. But I was proud of her. She had a master's degree, a successful career in marketing, and she'd finally found a man who seemed to adore her. The Williams family welcomed Sarah with open arms from the very beginning. David's parents, Charles and Patricia Williams, owned a chain of luxury hotels across the Northeast. They had old money, the kind that came with trust funds and summer houses, and the sort of casual confidence that only comes from never having to check your bank balance before making a purchase. Within 6 months of dating David, Sarah was spending holidays with the Williams family. Within a year, she was calling Patricia mom and Charles dad. I told myself it was sweet that she'd found a second family to love her. I told myself it didn't hurt that she started declining my invitations to Sunday dinner, because the Williams family had season tickets to the symphony. I was still telling myself it didn't hurt when Sarah called me last year to tell me she was engaged, and that Patricia Williams was helping her plan the wedding of her dreams. "It's going to be at the Grandview Country Club. Mom," she gushed over the phone. "Can you believe it? Patricia knows the event coordinator personally. They're giving us the full wedding package for $75,000. My heart stopped. $75,000. I know it sounds like a lot, but David's family has connections everywhere. The flowers alone would normally cost $15,000, but Patricia's friend owns the florist shop, and the photographer is Patricia's cousin. It's going to be perfect." "That's wonderful, sweetheart." I managed. "I'm so happy for you." What I didn't say was that I had exactly $837 in my checking account and a credit card that was maxed out from Sarah's last emergency. What I didn't say was that my retirement savings were already gone, spent on her graduate school and her apartment deposits and her career development courses and 100 other investments in her future that she'd somehow forgotten I'd made. "The only thing is," Sarah continued, "David's family is being so generous with everything else. I feel weird asking them to cover the whole wedding. I want to contribute something myself, to show them I'm not just marrying David for his family's money." "Of course," I said. "That's very thoughtful of you. So I was thinking maybe I could cover the venue fee. It's only $25,000, and I have some savings but not quite enough. Could you help me out just this once for my wedding? Just this once." As if the previous 22 years of just this once had never happened. But what was I supposed to say? "No, I won't help pay for your wedding." Let David's family think I didn't care enough about my own daughter to contribute to her special day. So I said yes. Of course I said yes. I took out a home equity loan for $30,000. $25,000 for the venue. $5,000 as a cushion for any additional expenses that might come up, because there are always additional expenses. Like the $10,000 dress Sarah fell in love with that wasn't quite in her budget. Like the $1,500 shoes that were the only ones that would work with the dress. Like the custom jewelry she simply had to have to complete the look. By the time David spoke those 5 words that made the entire ballroom gasp, I was in debt for the first time in my life with a home equity loan that would take me 7 years to pay off on my fixed income. But that wasn't even the worst part. The worst part was that somehow in Sarah's mind, all of that money had come from the Williams family. The silence stretched on for what felt like hours but was probably only seconds. I could see Sarah's mind racing, trying to figure out how to spin this. How to make David's revelation fit into the narrative she'd constructed about her generous adoptive family and her neglectful real mother. What David means, she finally said, her voice artificially bright, is that Mom contributed to the wedding costs along with David's family. It was a team effort. David turned to look at his bride with an expression I couldn't quite read. No, Sarah, that's not what I mean. I had to give him credit. For a man who'd barely acknowledged my existence for the past 3 years, he was certainly finding his voice at the most dramatic possible moment. Your mother didn't contribute to the wedding costs, David continued, his voice carrying clearly through the ballroom's perfect acoustics. She paid for everything. The venue, the flowers, the music, the food, the bar, everything. Patricia Williams stood up abruptly from the head table, her face white as her son's dress shirt. David, what are you talking about? We discussed the budget months ago. Your father and you discussed planning the wedding, David interrupted. Mrs. Patterson paid for it. Now, let me tell you something about the Williams family that Sarah never quite understood despite spending 3 years trying to earn their approval. They weren't actually wealthy. Not in the way Sarah thought they were. Oh, they were comfortable enough. Charles Williams owned 2 hotels, not a chain. Nice hotels, boutique properties in Vermont and New Hampshire that catered to leaf peepers and ski tourists. They did well during peak seasons and struggled during the off-seasons. Like most small business owners in the hospitality industry, the house Sarah loved so much, the one where she spent every holiday and most weekends, it belonged to Charles's mother, who was 93 and had been talking about selling it for the past 5 years. The cars, the club memberships, the season tickets to the symphony, all carefully managed to create an impression of wealth that was about 60% real and 40% smoke and mirrors. I knew this because I wasn't 22 and starried like my daughter. I was 68 and had been managing money, other people's money, for most of my adult life. I knew how to read between the lines when Charles Williams casually mentioned that business had been challenging lately, or when Patricia sighed about having to scale back their vacation plans. More importantly, I knew how to listen to the things people didn't say. When Sarah started gushing about how the Williams family was taking care of everything for the wedding, I paid attention. When she mentioned that Patricia was coordinating with all the vendors, I made some phone calls. It took exactly 3 phone calls to learn that no deposits had been made, no contracts had been signed, and no payments had been arranged for any aspect of Sarah's dream wedding. The Williams family was planning a beautiful wedding for their son. They just weren't planning to pay for it. I could have told Sarah. I could have sat her down and explained that her future in-laws were expecting her to cover the costs of the wedding they were so enthusiastically planning. But I knew my daughter well enough to know exactly how that conversation would go. She would have been devastated. She would have cried about how humiliating it would be to scale back the wedding plans after Patricia had already sent invitations to half of New England's social register. She would have worried about what David's family would think of her if she couldn't afford the kind of wedding they considered appropriate for their son. And then she would have asked me to help her just this once for her wedding because she couldn't possibly ask David's family to contribute more than they already had. So I skipped the middle part and went straight to the solution. I called the Grandview Country Club and paid the deposit myself. I called the florist and the photographer and the caterer and the musicians, and I paid all of them myself. I told myself I was protecting Sarah's dignity. I told myself I was ensuring she got the wedding she'd always dreamed of. I told myself that someday when she and David were settled and successful, she'd understand what I'd done and why I'd done it. What I didn't tell myself, because I'm not completely naive, was that there was a very good chance Sarah would never know what I'd done. That she would go through her entire marriage believing that her generous in-laws had given her a fairy tale wedding, while her own mother had contributed nothing but criticism and complaints. I made peace with that possibility because I loved my daughter more than I loved being credited for my sacrifices. But apparently David Williams was more honest than I'd given him credit for. Mrs. Patterson, David said, turning to address me directly for the first time all evening. I owe you an apology. When I learned the truth about who was paying for today, I should have said something sooner. I should have insisted that Sarah acknowledge your generosity properly. Sarah was looking back and forth between her new husband and me like she was watching a tennis match in slow motion. What truth, David? What are you talking about? Your parents planned this whole wedding. My parents planned the wedding. David agreed. Your mother paid for it. All of it. The total cost was $87,000. That number hung in the air like smoke from a fire that's just been extinguished. I watched Sarah's face as she processed what David had said. Watched her mental calculations as she tried to figure out how I could possibly have that kind of money. Because she knew better than anyone that I'd been living on a fixed income since I retired 5 years ago. She knew I downsized to a smaller house. She knew I drove a 10-year-old Honda and bought generic groceries and hadn't taken a vacation in longer than she could remember. What she didn't know was that all of those economies had been necessary to pay for her life. That's impossible, Sarah said finally. Mom doesn't have that kind of money. She does now that she's taken out a home equity loan, David replied quietly. And that's when I realized that my new son-in-law knew a lot more about my financial situation than he'd ever let on. The look on Sarah's face was something I'd never seen before. Not in 42 years of being her mother. It wasn't surprise or gratitude or even embarrassment. It was something closer to betrayal, as if I'd committed some unforgivable crime by secretly funding her perfect wedding. "You took out a loan," she whispered, her voice carrying just far enough for the nearby tables to hear. "Mom, why would you do that?" And there it was. The question I'd been dreading for 3 years. Ever since I first started covering Sarah's expenses with money I didn't actually have. Not thank you or I had no idea or I'm so sorry you've been struggling financially because of me. Just why would you do that? As if my actions were somehow an imposition on her life rather than a gift. "I did it because you're my daughter," I said simply. "And because you wanted this wedding." "But I never asked you to go into debt for me," Sarah protested, and I could see her rewriting history in real time. "I would never have wanted you to take out a loan. You should have told me you couldn't afford it." Patricia Williams had been growing paler by the minute, and she finally found her voice. "Margaret, we had no idea. We never would have accepted such generosity if we'd known the burden it would place on you." "What burden?" Sarah snapped, turning on her new mother-in-law with surprising venom. "Mom made her own choices. No one forced her to pay for anything." I watched Patricia Williams' face carefully as Sarah spoke, and I saw something there that made my heart sink. It was the look of someone who was finally seeing my daughter clearly for the first time, and not particularly liking what they saw. "Sarah," David said quietly, "perhaps we should continue this conversation privately." "No," Sarah said, her voice rising enough to carry to the far corners of the ballroom. "I'm tired of private conversations. I'm tired of secrets. Mom, if you couldn't afford to pay for my wedding, you should have said so from the beginning instead of making me look like a fool." Making her look like a fool, not making yourself struggle financially or sacrificing your security for my happiness. Making her look like a fool. "How exactly do you look like a fool?" I asked. And for the first time all evening I heard the edge in my own voice. "Because people found out your mother loves you enough to pay for your dream wedding. Because everyone thinks I'm some spoiled brat who doesn't appreciate what she has." Sarah shot back. "Because you've made it look like I've been taking advantage of you all these years." The silence that followed was so complete. I could hear the ice melting in the champagne buckets. "Haven't you?" The voice came from somewhere behind me, and I turned to see David's sister, Emma, who was sitting with her husband at table 12. "Been taking advantage of her, I mean." Sarah's face went crimson. "Excuse me?" Emma shrugged, seemingly unbothered by the fact that she'd just thrown a grenade into an already explosive situation. "I'm just saying. David told me your mom has been supporting you financially for years. The apartment deposits, the graduate school, the career development courses, and now an $87,000 wedding that she paid for with a home equity loan. If my mother had done that for me, I'd be thanking her, not complaining about how she made me look." "You don't understand the situation," Sarah said tightly. "Then explain it to me," Emma replied. "Explain how a 68-year-old woman going into debt to pay for her daughter's dream wedding is anything other than an incredibly generous sacrifice that deserves gratitude, not public humiliation." I could see Sarah scrambling for a response, trying to find a way to make herself the victim in this scenario. But before she could speak, David stepped forward again. "Sarah, I need to tell you something else." His voice was steady, but I could see his hands trembling slightly about the financial arrangements for our future. "Oh no, I had a feeling I knew where this was going. And it wasn't anywhere good. What about our future?" Sarah asked. David glanced at his parents, who both nodded slightly as if giving him permission to continue. "When we talked about our financial plans after the wedding, You mentioned that you expected to be able to rely on family support if we needed it, the way you've always been able to. So Sarah's voice was defensive now. So I assumed you meant your mother would continue to help us financially when we needed it. The down payment on a house, maybe help with children's expenses eventually. I thought she was wealthy, Sarah. I thought that's where all the money you've had access to is coming from. Sarah's face went from red to white in about 3 seconds. David, you know Mom isn't wealthy. I told you she's on a fixed income. You told me she was being overly cautious with her money. David corrected. You said she had savings but was too conservative with her spending. You said she could afford to help us but chose not to because she wanted to maintain control over you. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. That's what Sarah had told David about me. That I had money but withheld it to control her. I never said she was wealthy, Sarah protested. But her voice lacked conviction. You said she owned her house outright. David continued relentlessly. You said she had a good pension from her job. You said the only reason she lived so modestly was because she was paranoid about spending money. She does own her house, Sarah said weakly. She owns a house that's mortgaged to pay for your lifestyle, Emma interjected. There's a difference. David turned to look at me, and I saw something in his eyes that might have been respect. Mrs. Patterson, I owe you more than an apology. I owe you an explanation. When Sarah and I talked about our future together, about starting a family and buying a house, she assured me that we'd have family support when we needed it. I believed her. What are you saying? Sarah asked, and I could hear the panic creeping into her voice. I'm saying that I made certain financial decisions based on the assumption that your mother would be able to help us the way she's always helped you. David's voice was gentle but firm. And now that I know the truth about her situation, I realize that I need to reconsider some of those decisions. Sarah stared at her brand new husband like she'd never seen him before. What decisions? David glanced around the ballroom at the 300 guests who were hanging on every word of this increasingly personal conversation. And I saw him make a choice. I think, he said quietly, that this is a conversation we should have privately, but Sarah was having none of it. No, David, tell me now what decisions. David sighed. The house we put an offer on last month, I agreed to a purchase price that was above our means because you assured me your mother would help with the down payment. The fertility treatments we discussed starting after our honeymoon, because you said family money would cover the costs if insurance didn't. The plan for you to quit your job when we have children because you said we'd have generational wealth to fall back on. With each word, Sarah seemed to shrink a little bit more. And I finally understood why David had chosen this moment, this very public moment, to reveal the truth about who had paid for the wedding. He wasn't just being honest. He was protecting himself from a marriage built on a foundation of lies about money that didn't exist. And suddenly I didn't feel humiliated anymore. I felt something much more dangerous. I felt vindicated. The wedding reception had officially become a live episode of a daytime drama, complete with shocked gasps from the audience and a heroine who was slowly realizing that her entire life script needed to be rewritten. Sarah stood there in her expensive dress that I'd paid for, holding on to her expensive bouquet that I'd paid for, staring at her expensive husband, who was systematically dismantling every financial assumption she'd built their future on. You put an offer on a house? I asked, genuinely curious. This was the first I'd heard of any house. The Morrison Place on Elm Street, David replied, addressing me directly again. 4 bedrooms, colonial style with a 3-car garage, listed at $650,000. I nearly choked. $650,000. I'd worked for 43 years and never owned anything worth that much, including the house I just mortgaged to pay for this wedding. We offered $700,000, Sarah said quietly, as if the extra $50,000 were somehow less shocking when whispered. $700,000. I repeated the number slowly, letting it sink in for a house. It's a seller's market, Sarah said defensively. And the location is perfect, close to David's family. Good school district for when we have children. And how exactly were you planning to afford a $700,000 house? I asked. Sarah glanced at David, then back at me. We have savings and David has a good job, and we thought. She trailed off. You thought I'd give you the down payment? I finished for her. Not give, Sarah said quickly. Help with as an investment in our future. Families help each other with major purchases like homes. Some families do, I agreed. Families that have money to spare. Patricia Williams, who had been unusually quiet during this exchange, finally spoke up. Margaret, we feel terrible about this misunderstanding. If we'd known that Sarah was counting on your financial support without discussing it with you first, we never would have encouraged such ambitious plans. What do you mean encouraged? Sarah turned toward her mother-in-law with a sharpness that made me wheeze. Patricia looked uncomfortable. Well, dear, when you and David were house hunting, you did mention that you had family resources to help with the purchase. We assumed you'd had those conversations with your mother. I don't need to ask permission to plan my own future, Sarah snapped. You do when it involves other people's money, Emma interjected from table 12. She seemed to be enjoying this drama entirely too much. But I had to admit I was grateful for her bluntness. David cleared his throat. Sarah, there's something else we need to discuss about the fertility treatments. Oh dear Lord. It was going to get worse. What about the fertility treatments? Sarah asked, though I could tell from her voice that she already knew she wasn't going to like the answer. The consultation appointment we scheduled for next month. The doctor's office called yesterday to confirm our payment plan for the initial round of treatments. $15,000 due before we begin. Sarah's face went gray. You told them we'd pay $15,000. I told them we'd pay $15,000 because you assured me your mother would cover medical expenses that weren't covered by insurance. David replied. You said she'd already told you she wanted to help us start a family. I stared at my daughter in complete bewilderment. When did I tell you that? You didn't explicitly say it, Sarah admitted. But when we talked about David and me having children, you seemed excited about becoming a grandmother. I assumed that meant you'd want to help make it happen. I am excited about becoming a grandmother, I said slowly. That doesn't mean I have $15,000 to spend on fertility treatments. But if you really wanted grandchildren, Sarah began. If I really wanted grandchildren, what? I'd go further into debt to pay for medical procedures for a daughter who just spent 10 minutes publicly explaining to 300 people how inadequate I am as a mother. The question hung in the air like a challenge, and I could see Sarah realizing that she might have burned a bridge she was still planning to cross. Mom, I didn't mean you meant every word. I interrupted. And that's fine. You're entitled to your feelings about me and about how I raised you, but you're not entitled to my money to fund a lifestyle you can't afford, while simultaneously explaining to everyone how disappointing I am. Charles Williams had been conspicuously silent throughout this entire conversation, but he finally spoke up. Perhaps, he said diplomatically, we should all take a step back and remember that this is Sarah and David's wedding day. Whatever issues need to be resolved can surely be discussed privately at a more appropriate time. No, I said, surprising myself with the firmness in my voice. I think this is exactly the right time to discuss it. Sarah has made her feelings about me and my role in her life very clear. And I think David deserves to understand the financial reality he's marrying into. I turned to address David directly. Your wife believes she's entitled to financial support from a woman she considers inadequate and pathetic. She's made financial commitments on your behalf based on money she doesn't have and never bothered to ask for. She's planned a lifestyle that requires ongoing subsidies from someone she publicly humiliates. Does that sound like a sustainable arrangement to you? David looked from me to Sarah and back again. Mrs. Patterson, I had no idea. Of course you didn't, I said, because Sarah never told you the truth about our financial arrangement. She let you believe I was wealthy and stingy instead of struggling and generous. She let you plan a future based on resources that don't exist. That's not fair, Sarah protested. You never told me you were struggling. You never said you couldn't afford to help me. When I asked when should I have told you? When you were crying about the ski trip, or when you were panicking about graduate school, or when you were excited about your dream wedding? When exactly should I have sat you down and explained that helping you was requiring me to sacrifice my financial security? Sarah had no answer for that because we both knew there had never been a good time for that conversation. There had only been crisis after crisis, each one urgent enough to require immediate financial assistance and emotionally charged enough to make practical discussions about my limitations feel cruel and selfish. But I was done feeling cruel and selfish for having limitations. David, I said, turning back to my new son-in-law, let me be very clear about something. I love my daughter. I want her to be happy, but I cannot and will not continue to fund a lifestyle I can't afford for someone who treats me like an embarrassment. Mom, Sarah said, her voice smaller now. I never meant to. Yes, you did, I said gently. You meant every word you said tonight, and that's okay. You're a grown woman, and you're entitled to your opinions about me, but you're not entitled to my financial support while holding those opinions. I picked up my purse and stood up from the table for what I now realized would be the last time. Congratulations on your marriage, I said to David. I hope you'll be very happy together. And I hope you'll both learn to live within your means. And then I walked out of my daughter's wedding reception, leaving behind not just the party, but 22 years of financial obligation to someone who had never appreciated the sacrifice. For the first time in decades, I felt free. I made it exactly halfway across the country club parking lot before I heard footsteps behind me. I didn't turn around. I knew who it was before David's voice called out, "Mrs. Patterson, please wait." I stopped walking but didn't turn around immediately. The August evening was warm and humid, the kind of night where the air felt thick enough to swim through. In the distance, I could hear the string quartet resuming their performance, as if nothing had happened, as if my entire relationship with my daughter hadn't just imploded in front of 300 witnesses. "Mrs. Patterson." David's voice was closer now, uncertain. I turned around to find him standing about 10 feet away, his bow tie undone, and his perfect hair mussed like he'd been running his hands through it. He looked younger, somehow, less polished than the confident groom who'd walked down the aisle 6 hours earlier. "What can I do for you, David?" I asked, and I was pleased to hear that my voice sounded steadier than I felt. He took a few steps closer, stopping just outside what felt like polite conversation distance. "I wanted to apologize for all of it, for not knowing, for not asking, for letting Sarah make assumptions about your financial situation without verifying them." "You don't need to apologize to me," I said. "You're not responsible for your wife's relationship with money, or with me." "Wife." He said the word like he was testing it out, seeing how it fit. "That's going to take some getting used to." I studied his face in the parking lot lighting, trying to read his expression. "Are you having second thoughts?" He was quiet for a long moment, long enough that I could hear the distant sound of laughter from the reception and the closer sound of cicadas in the oak trees that lined the country club driveway. "Can I ask you something?" he said finally. "Of course. How long has this been going on?" The financial support, I considered lying. Or at least softening the truth. But David had been honest enough to expose the reality of who had paid for this wedding, even though it would have been easier for him to stay quiet. I owed him the same honesty. 22 years, I said. Since her junior year of college, he nodded slowly like he'd expected something like that, but hoped he was wrong. "And in all that time, she's never paid you back. Never offered to help you financially." "She's never been in a position to help me financially," I said. "Every time she gets ahead, there's always another expense, another opportunity, another crisis that requires immediate funding. Funded by you, funded by me." David sat down heavily on the decorative stone wall that bordered the parking lot, and I was struck by how exhausted he looked. "Mrs. Patterson, can I tell you something that's going to sound terrible? I think we've moved past worrying about how things sound, don't you?" He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I've been having doubts about Sarah for months, about her relationship with money, about her expectations for our future, about the way she talks about you." That last part caught my attention. "How does she talk about me?" "Like you're a burden she's been forced to carry instead of a mother who sacrificed for her happiness." He looked up at me with an expression that might have been respect. "I never understood why she seemed so resentful of you when you've been nothing but supportive of her dreams. Now I'm starting to realize that the support was more literal than I knew." "David, can I ask you something?" "Fair trade. Why did you say what you said in there about who paid for the wedding? You could have stayed quiet and let Sarah continue believing her version of events." He was quiet for a moment, staring at his hands, because I realized that if I let her humiliate you publicly without saying anything, I'd be complicit in it. And because I needed to know the truth about our financial future before we started building a life together. "And now that you know, now I know that the woman I married has been living a lie for over 20 years, and she's expected me to participate in that lie without telling me what I was signing up for." He looked up at me again. "Mrs. Patterson, I make a good salary, but I'm not wealthy. I can't afford a $700,000 house and fertility treatments and the kind of lifestyle Sarah thinks we're going to have. And I can't ask my parents to cover the difference because they don't have that kind of money either. What are you going to do?" "I don't know," he admitted. Cancel the house offer, obviously. Have some very difficult conversations about expectations and reality. Figure out if there's a marriage worth saving underneath all the financial delusions. I felt a pang of something that might have been sympathy for my daughter. Whatever mistakes she'd made, whatever selfishness she'd displayed, she was about to face some very harsh realities about the life she'd constructed and the assumptions she'd built it on. David, can I give you some unsolicited advice, please? Don't make any major decisions tonight. This has been emotional and public and humiliating for everyone involved. Give yourselves some time to process what happened before you decide what comes next. He nodded. That's good advice. Thank you. And David, whatever you decide about your marriage, I hope you'll remember that Sarah isn't entirely at fault here. I enabled her expectations by never setting clear boundaries about what I could and couldn't afford. I made it easy for her to take my financial support for granted because I never wanted her to worry about money the way I did when I was her age. You're very generous with someone who just humiliated you in front of 300 people. I shrugged. She's still my daughter. That doesn't change just because she hurt my feelings. David stood up from the stone wall and straightened his jacket. I should get back inside. People will be wondering where the groom went. David. Yes. For what it's worth, I think you're a good man. I hope you and Sarah can figure this out. He smiled, and for the first time all evening it looked genuine. Thank you, Mrs. Patterson. And for what it's worth, I think Sarah is very lucky to have a mother like you. I just hope she realizes it before it's too late. As I watched him walk back toward the country club, I found myself hoping the same thing. But I also found myself realizing that whether Sarah figured it out or not, I was done waiting for her to appreciate what I'd given her. It was time to start living for myself. The valet brought my car around, and as I drove away from the Grandview Country Club, I made a decision that would have seemed impossible 6 hours earlier. I was done being my daughter's personal bank account. Whatever came next, I was going to face it with my financial independence intact. Even if that meant my relationship with Sarah didn't survive the transition. Some prices, I realized, were simply too high to pay even for love. I thought I'd have at least a few days of peace before Sarah came crawling back. But I should have known better. My daughter had never been one to let pride stand between her and something she wanted. And apparently what she wanted now was damage control. The phone started ringing at 7:30 the next morning. I let it go to voicemail. It rang again at 8. Voicemail again. By 9 o'clock, I'd received 6 calls, 4 text messages, and what appeared to be a handwritten note slipped under my front door. The note was vintage Sarah, dramatic, manipulative, and completely focused on her own feelings rather than anyone else's. Mom, I'm devastated by what happened last night. I never meant to hurt you. Please call me so we can talk this through. I love you so much and I can't bear the thought of you being angry with me. We're family and family forgives each other. Love, Sarah. I read it twice, looking for any acknowledgement of what she'd actually done wrong, any recognition of the 22 years of financial sacrifice she just dismissed as pathetic, any understanding of why I might be more than just angry. There was none. The phone rang again at 9:15. This time I answered, "Hello, Sarah. Mom, thank God. I've been trying to reach you all morning. Are you okay? You left so suddenly last night, and I was worried about you driving when you were upset." I had to give her credit for strategy, led with concern for my well-being. As if that had been her primary worry after publicly humiliating me at her wedding reception. "I'm fine, Sarah. I got home safely." Good. Good. Listen, Mom. I think we need to talk about what happened last night. There were some misunderstandings and I want to clear the air. Misunderstandings? That's what she was calling it. What misunderstandings? I asked. Well, for starters, I had no idea you'd taken out a loan to pay for the wedding. If I'd known you were struggling financially, I never would have accepted such a generous gift. A generous gift, not a sacrifice I'd made because she'd led me to believe she needed help covering her portion of the wedding costs. A generous gift that I'd apparently chosen to give her without any prompting or request on her part. "Sarah," I said calmly, "you specifically asked me to help you cover the venue fees so that you could contribute something to the wedding costs yourself. I know, but I meant help like a few thousand. Not $87,000. You should have told me you were planning to pay for everything." "You're right," I said. "I should have told you that the Williams family wasn't actually paying for anything, and that if you wanted the wedding you've been planning, Someone would need to cover the full cost. There was a pause. What do you mean the Williams family wasn't paying for anything? I mean, they never made any deposits, never signed any contracts, never arranged any payments. They planned your wedding, but they weren't paying for it. Another pause. Longer this time. That's not possible. Patricia coordinated everything with the vendors. Coordinating isn't the same as paying, sweetheart. I called every vendor on your list 3 months ago. None of them had received any payments or even payment arrangements from anyone in the Williams family. But David's parents said they were taking care of everything. They said they were taking care of the planning. You assumed they meant the payments. I could hear Sarah's breathing on the other end of the line. And I could practically see her recalculating the entire foundation of her wedding arrangements. Mom, are you saying that David's family knew you were paying for everything? I'm saying that David knew, I replied. And David told me yesterday that he tried to discuss the financial arrangements with his parents multiple times, but they kept redirecting the conversation back to the planning details. Why didn't anyone tell me? I think the better question is why you didn't ask. You've been planning this wedding for 8 months. You had to sign contracts, approve payments, make changes to orders. Did you never wonder why you weren't being asked to provide payment information? Sarah was quiet for so long. I thought she might have hung up. Finally, she said, I thought Patricia was handling all of that. With what money, Sarah? I don't know. I assumed they had money. Based on what? Based on their house, their lifestyle, the way they live. Their house belongs to David's grandmother. Their lifestyle consists of careful budgeting and strategic social positioning. They're comfortable, but they're not wealthy. I know this because, unlike you, I ask questions before making financial commitments. I could hear Sarah starting to cry, and part of me felt bad for destroying her illusions so systematically. But another part of me, the part that had been paying for those illusions for 22 years, felt like it was about time she faced reality. Mom, I feel so stupid. You're not stupid, Sarah. You're inexperienced with money because I've always handled financial problems for you. But inexperience stops being an excuse when you're 42 years old and planning a life with someone else. I know. You're right. But Mom, what am I going to do now? David is talking about canceling the house offer, postponing the fertility treatments, changing all our plans for the future. And there it was, the real reason for the phone call. Not guilt about what she'd said to me, not gratitude for what I'd sacrificed, not concern for my financial well-being. She was calling because David was forcing her to face the reality of their actual financial situation, and she needed me to fix it. What are you asking me, Sarah? I'm asking if maybe we could work something out. A loan or a payment plan or something, just until David and I get on our feet financially to pay for what? The house down payment. Maybe some of the fertility treatment costs. Just the essentials. Essentials. A $700,000 house and $15,000 fertility treatments were essentials. Sarah, I took out a home equity loan to pay for your wedding. I'm 68 years old and I now have a mortgage payment that will take me 7 years to pay off on my fixed income. I don't have any more money to loan you. But Mom, the house is such a good investment, and the fertility treatments are time-sensitive. If we wait too long, it might be too late for us to have children. Then maybe you should have had this conversation with me before you started making commitments you couldn't afford. I know, but we can't change that now. What matters is moving forward. Finding a solution that works for everyone. A solution that works for everyone. Meaning a solution that allows Sarah to keep the lifestyle she wants while I figure out how to pay for it. Sarah, let me ask you something. After everything that happened last night, after the way you spoke about me in front of 300 people, why do you think I would want to continue supporting you financially? Because you're my mother, she said, as if that explained everything. And because you love me, and because family helps each other. Family helps each other. From the woman who had just spent her wedding reception explaining to everyone how pathetic her real family was compared to her adopted one. You're right, I said. Family does help each other. But Sarah, what have you done to help me? The question seemed to catch her completely off guard. What do you mean? I mean, in 22 years of me helping you financially, what have you ever done to help me? Have you ever offered to pay for my groceries when money was tight? Have you ever helped with my utility bills or my car repairs or my medical expenses? Have you ever even asked if I needed help with anything? Silence. Sarah, I didn't know you needed help. You never said anything. I never said anything because every time we talked, You had a crisis that needed immediate financial attention. There was never space in our conversations for my problems because your problems always took priority. But Mom, if you'd told me you were struggling, you would have what? Given up your apartment to help me with my mortgage? Skipped your vacation to help me pay for my car repairs? Chosen a smaller wedding so I wouldn't have to go into debt? Another long silence. That's what I thought. I said, Sarah, I love you. I will always love you. But I'm done funding a lifestyle for someone who sees me as a pathetic embarrassment. You want to keep the house offer and the fertility treatments and all the plans you've made. Find another way to pay for them. Mom, please don't do this. Don't punish me for one bad night. I'm not punishing you, Sarah. I'm protecting myself. There's a difference. And for the first time in 22 years, I hung up on my daughter. I should have known that hanging up on Sarah wouldn't be the end of it. My daughter had never met a closed door she couldn't find a way to force open. And apparently my newfound financial boundaries were just another obstacle to overcome. The next assault came from David, which surprised me. I'd gotten the impression from our parking lot conversation that he was having his own crisis of faith about his marriage, but apparently married life was already teaching him the fine art of diplomatic pressure. He called Tuesday evening just as I was settling in with a cup of tea and the book I'd been trying to finish for 3 months. His voice was careful, measured, like someone who'd rehearsed this conversation. Mrs. Patterson, I hope I'm not disturbing you. Not at all, David. How are you adjusting to married life? It's been educational, he said, and I heard something in his tone that might have been dark humor. Mrs. Patterson, I wanted to call and apologize again for what happened at the reception, and to thank you for the advice about not making any major decisions while emotions were running high. You're welcome. Have you and Sarah had a chance to talk through everything? We have extensively. He paused. Mrs. Patterson, I wonder if I could ask you something. And I want you to know that I'm asking for myself. Not because Sarah asked me to call you. I doubted that was entirely true, but I appreciated the attempt at diplomacy. Go ahead. When you and I talked in the parking lot, you mentioned that you'd enabled Sarah's expectations by never setting clear boundaries about what you could and couldn't afford. I've been thinking about that, and I'm wondering if maybe there's a way to set those boundaries now in a way that works for everyone. Here it comes, I thought. The reasonable, rational proposal that would somehow allow Sarah to keep all her expensive plans while making me feel like I was being consulted rather than manipulated. What did you have in mind? Well, Sarah and I have been looking at our finances more realistically, and we've realized that we may have been overly ambitious with some of our plans. We're willing to scale back significantly, but there are a few expenses that are time-sensitive, such as the fertility treatments primarily. Sarah is 42, and our doctor has advised us that waiting another year could significantly reduce our chances of success. We're not asking for the full $15,000. We found a clinic that offers a payment plan that would require a down payment of $5,000 with the rest spread over 18 months. $5,000. Just $5,000 for the chance to give Sarah the family she'd always wanted. It sounded so reasonable when he put it like that. And the house? We're withdrawing our offer on the Morrison place. You're absolutely right that it was beyond our means. We found a smaller place, a townhouse that's much more affordable. We can handle the mortgage payments ourselves, but we'd need help with the down payment. $10,000. $10,000 for the house, $5,000 for the fertility treatments, $15,000 total. Still less than I'd spent on Sarah's wedding dress and shoes. David, can I ask you something? Of course. Why me? You and Sarah are both employed, both educated, both capable adults. Why is your financial plan dependent on a 68-year-old woman on a fixed income? He was quiet for a moment. Because we've been living beyond our means for longer than we realized, and we've made commitments based on assumptions that turned out to be wrong. That's honest, but it doesn't answer my question. Why is your solution to ask me to bail you out instead of finding a way to live within the means you actually have? Because we don't have time to save $15,000. By the time we could save that amount, it might be too late for Sarah to have children. And if I say no, another pause, then we'll figure something else out. But Mrs. Patterson, I'm hoping you'll consider this as an investment in Sarah's happiness and in your relationship with her. There it was, the subtle threat wrapped in a reasonable request. Give us the money or Sarah will be unhappy and blame you for ruining her chances at motherhood and home ownership. David, let me make sure I understand what you're asking. You want me to give you $15,000 on top of the $87,000 I just spent on your wedding so that you and Sarah can have the house and the family you want on the timeline you want. We'd pay you back, he said quickly. With interest, we could formalize it as a loan if that would make you more comfortable. Like the loan Sarah was supposed to pay me back for her ski trip 22 years ago, or the loan for her graduate school or the loan for her apartment deposits. Silence. David, I'm going to tell you something that Sarah apparently never shared with you. In 22 years of loaning your wife money, she has never, not once, paid me back a single dollar. Not because she couldn't, but because every loan magically became a gift in her mind. This would be different, David said. We'd put it in writing. We'd set up automatic payments. Why would this be different? Because I'd be involved. Because I understand the importance of honoring financial obligations. I had to give him credit for trying, but I'd seen this movie too many times to believe the ending would be any different. David, let me tell you what would happen if I gave you $15,000. For the first few months, maybe the first year, you'd make the payments, but then something would come up. Sarah would lose her job, or one of you would have medical expenses, or there would be some other. Why would this time be different? David was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer, less rehearsed. Because I really do love your daughter, and I really do want our marriage to work. And I'm starting to understand that it won't work if we keep expecting other people to solve our financial problems, then solve them yourselves. How? The same way millions of other couples do. Live within your means. Save up for what you want. Wait until you can afford things before you buy them. Make sacrifices in some areas so you can prioritize others. But the fertility treatments, David, if you can't afford to have children, you're not ready to have children. Kids are expensive. If you need me to loan you money to get pregnant, how are you going to pay for diapers and doctor visits and childcare and everything else that comes with parenthood? I could hear him breathing on the other end of the line. And I could tell he was trying to find another angle, another way to make this sound reasonable. Mrs. Patterson, Sarah's really struggling with this. She feels like you're punishing her for what she said at the wedding. I'm not punishing her. I'm declining to reward her. She's afraid you don't love her anymore. David, I will always love my daughter. But I finally realized that love doesn't require me to bankrupt myself to fund her dreams. She wants to see you, to apologize properly and work things out. She can apologize anytime she wants, but if she's hoping the apology will come with a check, she's going to be disappointed. David sighed. I understand, and honestly, Mrs. Patterson, I think you're probably right about all of it. We need to learn to live within our means, and we need to stop expecting you to solve our problems. I'm glad you understand. But Mrs. Patterson, can I ask one more favor? Here we go. I thought, what's that? Will you at least consider having dinner with us? Not to talk about money, just to talk. Sarah is my wife now, and you're her mother. And I'd like for us to find a way to have a relationship that isn't based on financial obligations. I thought about it. Part of me wanted to say no, to maintain my boundaries and protect myself from further manipulation. But another part of me, the part that still remembered holding my baby daughter for the first time, wasn't quite ready to give up entirely. All right, I said. Dinner. But David, if this turns into another pitch for money, I'm leaving. Understood. Thank you, Mrs. Patterson. After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen wondering if I was making a mistake. But I'd spent 42 years being Sarah's mother. I wasn't quite ready to stop, even if the terms of engagement were about to change dramatically. The dinner was scheduled for Friday night at 7 o'clock at a restaurant called Romano's that I'd never heard of, but that Sarah assured me was casual and comfortable. When I arrived, I understood why she'd chosen it. Romano's was the kind of place where entree cost $45 and the wine list started at $15 a glass. Casual and comfortable. If you were comfortable spending $100 on dinner for two, Sarah and David were already seated at a corner table. And I could tell from Sarah's body language that she'd been crying recently. Her eyes were red-rimmed despite obvious attempts to cover the evidence with makeup. And she had that fragile look she'd always gotten as a child when she was trying very hard not to cry again. "Mom," she said, standing up to hug me. "Thank you so much for coming." "Of course, sweetheart." I hugged her back, noting that she felt thinner than she had at the wedding. "Dress probably." David stood and pulled out my chair, which was more courtesy than he'd shown me in 3 years of dating my daughter. "Mrs. Patterson, you look lovely." "Thank you." I sat down and glanced at the menu, trying not to wheeze at the prices. This is a nice place. Sarah picked it, David said. She thought you'd enjoy the atmosphere. What I enjoyed was the fact that Sarah had apparently forgotten that I'd raised her to be considerate of other people's budgets when choosing restaurants. But then again, Sarah had been forgetting a lot of things about how she'd been raised lately. So I said, settling into my seat, "How was the honeymoon planning? I know you were hoping to go to Europe." Sarah and David exchanged a look that I couldn't quite interpret. "We've decided to postpone the honeymoon," Sarah said. "Just temporarily until we get some other things sorted out." "Financial things, I asked, among others," David replied diplomatically. The waiter appeared and asked if we'd like to start with drinks. David ordered wine for himself and Sarah, and I asked for water with lemon. When the waiter left, Sarah leaned forward. "Mom, I owe you an apology, a real one, not the phone call kind." "I'm listening." "What I said at the wedding reception was inexcusable. I was trying to be grateful to David's family for welcoming me, and I ended up making it sound like you'd never done anything for me. That was wrong, and I'm sorry." It was a better apology than I'd expected, but I could tell there was more coming. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said about how I've never helped you financially, and you're right. I never asked if you needed help, never offered to contribute to your expenses, never even considered that you might be struggling. Go on. I guess I always assumed you were fine. You never complained about money, never acted like you couldn't afford things. You just handled everything. So I thought you could afford to handle everything." And now Sarah's eyes filled with tears again. "Now I realize that you were sacrificing your own financial security to give me opportunities you never had. And instead of appreciating that, I took it for granted." It was a good apology. It hit all the right notes, acknowledged the right problems, demonstrated the right understanding of what had gone wrong. But something about it felt rehearsed, like she'd practiced it in front of a mirror. "I appreciate the apology, Sarah. I really do, but I'm wondering what you want to do with that understanding going forward." Sarah glanced at David, who nodded encouragingly. "I want to find a way to make things right between us, to rebuild our relationship on a foundation of honesty instead of assumptions." "That sounds good. What would that look like?" "Well, for starters, I want to pay you back. Not everything all at once, because honestly we can't afford that right now, but something every month, even if it's just a small amount. I want to start acknowledging the debt I owe you." I stared at my daughter, trying to figure out if this was genuine or just another manipulation tactic. "How much do you think you owe me, Sarah?" She pulled out a piece of paper from her purse. "I've been trying to remember everything. The ski trip, graduate school, the apartment deposits, the wedding. I think it's somewhere around $200,000. $237,000, I said. "I have the receipts." Sarah's face went pale. $237,000. Give or take a few hundred. "Jesus," David muttered. "I know it's a lot," Sarah said quickly. "I know we can't pay it back quickly, but if we could pay you $500 a month every month, it would take," she paused to calculate, "a really long time." 39 years, I said. "If you paid $500 a month with no interest, it would take you 39 years to pay me back." The waiter returned to take our dinner orders, which provided a welcome break in the conversation. I ordered the cheapest entree on the menu while Sarah and David ordered items that cost more than I typically spent on groceries in a week. When the waiter left, David cleared his throat. "Mrs. Patterson, we've been thinking about this situation from a different angle. Here it comes," I thought. "What if instead of trying to pay you back in cash, we found a way for you to benefit from our financial recovery? Like an investment in our future that would pay dividends over time?" "What kind of investment?" "Well, if you could help us with the down payment on the townhouse, you could be a part owner. When we sell it eventually, you'd get your investment back, plus a share of any appreciation. And the fertility treatments, think of them as an investment in your legacy, your grandchildren." I stared at David for a long moment. "Let me make sure I understand. You want me to give you more money on top of the $237,000 I've already given Sarah, and you're framing this as an investment opportunity for me. When you put it like that, it sounds bad." Sarah said. "But Mom, we're trying to find a way to include you in our success instead of just taking from you. Sarah, you're 42 years old. David, you're 45. You're both educated, employed adults. The fact that you need a 68-year-old woman to invest in your future should tell you something about the viability of that future." "That's not fair," Sarah protested. Lots of families help each other with major purchases. Lots of families have money to spare, I replied. I don't, but Mom, if we don't act soon, we might miss our chance to have children. And if we don't buy a house now, prices might go up even more. Sarah, those are choices you have to make based on your own resources, not mine. The food arrived and we ate in tense silence for a few minutes. Finally, Sarah put down her fork and looked at me with an expression I remembered from her childhood when she was about to play her final card in an argument. Mom, I need to tell you something. Something I probably should have told you a long time ago. I braced myself. I'm scared, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm scared that if I don't have children soon, I'll never have them. I'm scared that David will leave me if I can't give him a family. I'm scared that I've messed up my life so badly that I'll end up alone. It was emotional manipulation at its finest. But it was also probably true. Sarah had always been terrified of being alone, of not measuring up, of not having the life she thought she deserved. Sarah, I said gently, those are real fears and I understand them, but they're not my responsibility to fix. I know, she said, tears streaming down her face now. I know they're not your responsibility, but you're my mother. I don't have anyone else to turn to. You have a husband. David can't solve this by himself. He doesn't have the resources. Then maybe the solution isn't to find someone who does have the resources. Maybe the solution is to accept that you can't have everything you want exactly when you want it. Sarah stared at me like I'd suggested she cut off her arm. But Mom, this is my chance. Maybe my only chance. Maybe. Or maybe you'll find other chances, other solutions, other ways to build the life you want. But Sarah, I can't keep sacrificing my financial security for your chances. What if I promise to pay you back? Really promise, with a contract and everything. You promised to pay me back for the ski trip 22 years ago. This is different. How? Because I'm different. Because I understand now what I didn't understand then. I looked at my daughter, this beautiful, desperate woman who was still at 42 asking me to fix her problems. And I felt something shift inside me. Not anger, not resentment, but something closer to sadness. Sarah, I said, I love you. I will always love you. But I'm done being your solution to problems you need to solve yourself. Mom, please. No. I stood up and put my napkin on the table. I'm done, Sarah. Find another way. And for the second time in a week, I walked away from my daughter, knowing that this time I wasn't coming.